David Cooper pushed his cleaning cart down the long hallway, the wheels squeaking softly against the polished marble floor. It was just past 9 in the evening, and the Riverside Plaza was settling into its usual quiet rhythm. This was his favorite time to work. No crowds, no noise, just him and his mop bucket and the gentle hum of the building's air conditioning. He'd been doing this job for almost 3 years now. Some people might have looked down on it, being a janitor in a fancy building where a single apartment cost more than most people earned in a lifetime, but David never saw it that way. Work was work, and honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. Besides, he had the best reason in the world to show up every night and give it his all. His daughter, Lily. She was 8 years old with her mother's bright eyes and a smile that could light up the darkest room. After his wife passed away 4 years ago, Lily became his whole universe. Everything he did, every extra shift he picked up, every dollar he saved, it was all for her. David stopped at apartment 1502 and pulled out his key ring. Mrs. Patterson always left her trash outside the door on Tuesdays. She was one of the nice ones, always said hello, sometimes even asked about Lily. Most residents barely noticed him. He was part of the background, like the expensive paintings on the walls or the fancy light fixtures overhead. But he didn't mind being invisible. In some ways, it made the job easier. He could work at his own pace, think his own thoughts, and still be home by 6 in the morning to wake Lily up for school. His mother stayed with them at night, watching over Lily while he worked. It wasn't perfect, but they made it work. As he emptied the trash and moved to the next apartment, David's mind wandered to Lily's birthday coming up in a few weeks. She'd been talking about a bicycle for months now. Nothing fancy, just a regular bike with training wheels that she could ride around their neighborhood. He'd been putting aside money bit by bit, hiding it in an old coffee can in the kitchen cabinet. Almost had enough now. The 15th floor was always his last stop before his break. It housed the penthouses, the really expensive units where millionaires and business executives lived. David often wondered what it must be like to have so much money that you didn't have to check your bank account before buying groceries. Must be nice. He just finished mopping near the elevator when he spotted her. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8, sitting cross-legged in the hallway outside apartment 1520. She wore pink pajamas with butterflies on them and was playing with a dollhouse, moving tiny furniture around with intense concentration. David had seen her before, several times actually. She was the daughter of that real estate guy whose face was always in the business section of the newspaper. What was his name? Hartwell. Richard Hartwell. The man owned half the commercial buildings in the city. The girl looked up as David approached with his cart. Her name was Sophie, he'd learned from hearing the nanny call her. She had curly brown hair and dark eyes that seemed too serious for such a young face. Something about her always reminded him of Lily, though they looked nothing alike. Maybe it was the way she played alone, quiet and self-contained. "Hi," Sophie said softly, watching him work. "Hey there," David replied, giving her a small smile. "Little late to be up, isn't it?" She shrugged. "I can't sleep. Daddy's still at the office. Mrs. Chen is on the phone." Mrs. Chen was the nanny, a stern-looking woman who always seemed more interested in her cell phone than the child she was supposed to be watching. David had seen her many times, pacing the hallway with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking rapid Mandarin while Sophie played by herself. "Well, don't stay up too late," David said gently. "Growing kids need their sleep." Sophie nodded but didn't move. As David continued his work, he could feel her eyes on him. Kids did that sometimes. They were curious. He remembered Lily going through a phase where she wanted to know what everyone's job was, asking a million questions about what people did all day. "Do you have kids?" Sophie asked suddenly. David paused, leaning on his mop handle. "Yeah, I do. A daughter about your age. Her name's Lily. Is she nice?" "The nicest," David said, his chest warming at the thought of her. "She's funny, too. Always making up silly songs and telling jokes that don't quite make sense." Sophie smiled a little at that. "I wish I had a sister." Before David could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway, phone still pressed to her ear. She said something sharp in Mandarin, and Sophie quickly gathered her dollhouse and scurried inside. The door closed with a soft click. David shook his head and went back to work. He'd seen enough over the years to know that money didn't automatically make people good parents. That little girl had everything material she could want. But she spent most evenings sitting alone in a hallway while her father worked late, and her nanny ignored her. He thought about Lily again, probably fast asleep right now in her small bedroom with the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. They didn't have much. Their apartment was tiny, barely big enough for the three of them with his mother there. Lily wore hand-me-downs from their neighbor's daughter and ate spaghetti 3 nights a week because it was cheap and filling, but she was loved. God, was she loved. David made sure she knew it every single day. He read to her before bed when he wasn't working, helped with her homework, took her to the park on his days off. They were a team, him and Lily against the world. That's what mattered, he thought as he pushed his cart toward the service elevator. Not the size of your apartment or the price of your clothes. What mattered was showing up, being present, making sure the people you loved knew they were valued. David took the elevator down to the basement where the janitor's closet was located. His back ached a little as he emptied his mop bucket and refilled his cleaning supplies. 42 wasn't old, but years of physical work took their toll. Sometimes he wondered how much longer he could keep doing this, but then he'd think of Lily's college fund, still pitifully small, and he'd push those thoughts away. He grabbed a sandwich from his locker and sat down for his break, scrolling through his phone. His mother had sent a photo of Lily earlier, fast asleep with a book still in her hands. David smiled and saved the image. These were the moments that got him through the long nights. After 15 minutes, he headed back upstairs. The building was even quieter now, most residents already asleep. David worked steadily through the 13th and 14th floors, his movements automatic after years of the same routine. Sweep, mop, empty trash, check the bathrooms, move to the next floor. Around 11:30, he found himself back on the 15th floor. Everything was silent up here. Even the soft music that usually played from apartment 1518 had stopped. David moved methodically, his mind already looking ahead to the end of his shift. Just another couple of hours and he could head home, maybe catch a quick nap before Lily woke up. He was near the trash chute when something made him pause. A smell. Faint at first, but definitely there. David lifted his head, sniffing the air. It wasn't the usual building smells. The mix of cleaning products and expensive perfume and cooking from a dozen different apartments. This was something else. Something that made his pulse quicken. Smoke. David stood completely still, his hand frozen on the handle of his cleaning cart. He took another breath through his nose, trying to identify what he was smelling. It wasn't cigarette smoke. It wasn't someone burning food in their kitchen. This was different, thicker, more dangerous. His heart started beating faster. In 3 years of working in this building, he'd never smelled anything like this. He left his cart where it was and walked quickly down the hallway, following his nose. The smell got stronger as he approached the stairwell at the far end of the corridor. When he reached the stairwell door, his stomach dropped. Thin wisps of gray smoke were seeping out from beneath it, curling up into the hallway like ghostly fingers. David pressed his hand against the door. It was warm. Not burning hot, but definitely warmer than it should be. He didn't hesitate. His hand shot to his belt where he kept his radio clipped. "This is David on 15. We've got smoke in the east stairwell. Possible fire." The security guard's voice crackled back immediately. "Copy that. Pulling up cameras now." David's mind was racing. The east stairwell. That was right next to the Hartwell penthouse. Right next to apartment 1520. Right next to where he'd seen Sophie playing just a couple of hours ago. He pulled out his cell phone with shaking hands and dialed 911. As he waited for the operator to answer, he stared at that door, watching more smoke pour out from underneath. This was bad. This was really bad. "Woman, what's your emergency?" "There's a fire at Riverside Plaza on 7th Avenue, David said, forcing his voice to stay calm. 15th floor, east side. We need fire trucks here now. Stay on the line, sir. Units are being dispatched. Are you in a safe location?" David barely heard the question. His eyes were fixed on apartment 1520's door, about 30 feet down the hallway from where he stood. The smoke was starting to fill the corridor now, and he could see a faint orange glow coming from under the stairwell door. "Sir, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here." David reached over and pulled the fire alarm on the wall. The piercing shriek filled the building instantly, loud enough to wake everyone for blocks. The security guard's voice came back over the radio. "All residents His is not a drill. Please evacuate immediately using the west stairwells. Do not use the elevators." Doors started opening all along the hallway. People emerged in bathrobes and pajamas, confusion written across their faces. An elderly man in apartment 1516 shuffled out with his walker. A young couple from 1514 rushed past holding their cat carrier. "Move quickly but calmly," David called out, directing people toward the west stairwell. "Stay low if there's smoke. Keep moving." He kept counting doors in his head. 1516, 1518, 1520. The Hartwell apartment. Why wasn't anyone coming out? Where was Mrs. Chen? Where was Sophie? More residents streamed past him. The smoke was getting thicker now, hanging in the air like fog. David pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth. Through the haze, he could see that the door to 1520 was still closed. No movement. No sound except the wailing fire alarm. The 911 operator was still talking in his ear, asking questions about the number of residents and the extent of the fire. David shoved the phone in his pocket without hanging up and moved toward the Hartwell apartment. His legs felt heavy, like he was walking through water. He pounded on the door. "Hello? Anyone in there? You need to evacuate." No answer. He tried the handle. Locked. "Mrs. Chen, Sophie." He banged harder, his fist making dull thuds against the expensive wood. "There's a fire. You need to get out." Still nothing. Maybe they'd already left. Maybe they'd gone out earlier and he just hadn't noticed. But David couldn't shake the image of Sophie sitting in the hallway with her dollhouse, Mrs. Chen on the phone not paying attention. What if they were asleep? What if Mrs. Chen had her headphones in and couldn't hear the alarm? The building's PA system crackled to life. "All residents must evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Use the west stairwells only." David looked back toward the east stairwell. The smoke was pouring out steadily now, and through the small window in the door he could see flames. Actual flames, orange and hungry, climbing up the walls inside the stairwell. The fire was spreading fast. His radio crackled. "David, what's your status?" "You need to evacuate." He pressed the button. "Almost everyone's out on 15. I'm doing a final check. Negative, get out now. Fire department is 3 minutes away." 3 minutes. David looked at the closed door of apartment 1520. 3 minutes could be forever in a fire. He'd seen enough news stories to know how fast things could go wrong. He thought of Lily, imagined her trapped in a burning building with nobody coming to help. He made his decision. David ran back to his cleaning cart and grabbed the heavy flashlight he kept there. Then he returned to the Hartwell apartment door. "If anyone's in there, get back. I'm breaking down the door." He counted to 3 and swung the flashlight at the door handle as hard as he could. The impact jarred his arms, but the handle didn't budge. These were high-security locks built to keep people out. He swung again, and again. On the 4th hit, he heard something crack. 2 more strikes, and the handle broke free, hanging at an odd angle. David grabbed it and twisted. The door swung open. Smoke billowed out immediately, making him choke and stumble backward. It was so much worse inside the apartment. The air was thick and black, and the temperature hit him like a physical force. Through the haze, he could see flames along one wall, spreading across expensive curtains and climbing toward the ceiling. "Hello?" David shouted into the darkness. "Is anyone here?" He pulled his shirt tighter over his face and stepped inside. The smoke burned his eyes, making them water. He could barely see 2 feet in front of him. He swept the flashlight beam back and forth, trying to get his bearings. The apartment was huge, much bigger than it looked from the hallway. David stumbled through what seemed to be a living room, knocking into furniture he couldn't see. The smoke alarm inside the apartment was screaming, even louder than the building alarm. "Sophie, Mrs. Chen." His voice came out as a raspy cough. To his right, he saw a hallway leading deeper into the apartment. The flames hadn't reached there yet, but smoke filled every inch of space. David dropped to his hands and knees where the air was slightly clearer and crawled forward. He passed a bathroom, then what looked like an office. Papers were scattered across the floor, and he could see the silhouette of a desk through the smoke. His flashlight beam caught something else. A shoe, then a leg. Mrs. Chen was lying on the floor near the desk, unconscious. David crawled to her and pressed his fingers against her neck. Pulse. Weak. But there. She must have been overcome by the smoke. He needed to get her out, but first he needed to find Sophie. "Sophie," he yelled again, his throat raw. "Where are you?" He listened hard, trying to hear anything over the roar of the fire and the shriek of alarms. Was that something? A voice? David crawled further down the hallway, leaving Mrs. Chen where she lay for now. He'd come back for her. There were more doors. A bedroom with a massive bed and more smoke. Another bathroom. Then at the very end of the hall, a door decorated with stickers and a nameplate that read Sophie's room in cheerful purple letters. David pushed the door open. The smoke was less dense in here, the door having kept most of it out. His flashlight beam swept across the room, past a canopy bed and shelves full of toys and books. At first he thought the room was empty. Then he saw her. Sophie was huddled in the corner beneath the window, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was coughing hard, tears streaming down her face. When the flashlight beam hit her, she looked up with terrified eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Please help me." David felt something release in his chest. Found her. Thank God he found her. "I'm here," he said, crawling quickly across the room. "I've got you. You're okay now." Sophie started crying harder when he reached her. "I was so scared. I called for Mrs. Chen, but she didn't come. I tried to open the window, but it stuck. I didn't know what to do." "You did perfect," David told her, pulling her into his arms. She was so small, so light. "You stayed low where the air is better." That was exactly right. "Now we're going to get out of here, okay?" She wrapped her arms around his neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "I knew you would come," she sobbed. "When I heard the alarm, I thought maybe you would come. You're always here at night." David's heart clenched. This little girl, trapped and terrified in a burning building, had hoped he would save her. He wasn't going to let her down. David held Sophie tight against his chest with one arm and grabbed the blanket from her bed with the other. His mind was racing through options, calculating the best way out. The smoke was getting worse by the second, creeping under the door and filling the room with that choking, toxic haze. "Sophie, I need you to listen to me very carefully," he said, wrapping the blanket around her small body. "We have to go back through the apartment to get out. I'm going to carry you, and I need you to keep your face buried in this blanket. Don't breathe the smoke, okay? Keep your eyes closed tight." She nodded against his shoulder, her whole body trembling. "What about Mrs. Chen?" "I'm going to get her too," David promised. "But first I need to get you somewhere safe." He stood up with Sophie in his arms and immediately started coughing. Even in this room, the smoke was thick enough to burn his lungs. He couldn't imagine what it would be like in the hallway. There wasn't time to think about it, though. Every second they stayed here, the fire grew worse. David dropped back down to a crouch, keeping Sophie's blanket-wrapped form close to his chest. He pushed open the bedroom door with his shoulder, and a wave of hot black smoke rolled in. The temperature had climbed dramatically. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the tears from his burning eyes. "Hold on tight," he told Sophie, and felt her arms grip his neck even harder. He couldn't see anything. The flashlight he'd been using was somewhere back in the room, dropped when he'd picked up Sophie. David kept one hand on the wall and shuffled forward, bent almost double to stay below the worst of the smoke. Each breath felt like inhaling fire. Sophie was coughing into the blanket, her small body shaking with each spasm. David wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but he needed all his breath just to keep moving. His sense of direction was completely gone in the blackness. Was he heading toward the living room or deeper into the apartment? His hand hit a doorframe. The office. He remembered passing it before. Mrs. Chen was in there, lying unconscious on the floor. David's lungs were screaming for air and his head was starting to feel light and fuzzy. He knew these were signs of oxygen deprivation, knew that he was running out of time. He couldn't carry them both. Sophie weighed maybe 50 pounds, but Mrs. Chen was a full-grown woman. There was no way he could manage both of them through this smoke while staying low enough to breathe. "Sophie," he gasped, "I need to put you down for just a minute. Stay right here against the wall. Keep that blanket over your face." "No." Sophie's voice was panicked. "Don't leave me. I'm not leaving. I'm right here. I just need both hands. I promise I'm not going anywhere without you." He set her down gently against the wall and crawled into the office. His hands found Mrs. Chen's arm in the darkness. He grabbed her under the shoulders and started dragging her backward. She was heavy, dead weight, and every inch he pulled her felt like a mile. The heat was incredible now. David could feel it through his clothes, radiating from the walls and floor. Somewhere nearby, he could hear the crackle and roar of phlegm. The fire was spreading, eating through the expensive apartment, destroying everything in its path. He got Mrs. Chen to the hallway where Sophie was waiting. His arms felt like rubber and his head was spinning. Black spots danced at the edges of his vision. He was running out of time. They were all running out of time. "Okay," He panted, trying to think clearly through the fog in his brain. New plan. He positioned Mrs. Chen on her back and grabbed her under the arms again. Then he looked at Sophie through the smoke. "You're going to hold on to my belt. Don't let go no matter what. We're going to move together. Can you do that?" Sophie nodded, her face barely visible through the blanket. "I can do it." "Good girl." David felt her small hands grip his belt. "Here we go." He started dragging Mrs. Chen again, moving backward through the hallway toward what he hoped was the living room. Sophie shuffled along behind him, her grip on his belt never wavering. It was impossibly slow. His back screamed in protest, his lungs burned, and his eyes streamed tears that had nothing to do with emotion. A loud crack echoed through the apartment, followed by a crash. Part of the ceiling in what must have been the living room had collapsed, sending up a shower of sparks and a fresh wave of smoke. David could see the orange glow of flames much closer now, spreading across the walls and floor between them and the front door. They couldn't go that way. "The path was blocked back," David coughed. "We have to go back." He changed direction, pulling Mrs. Chen toward Sophie's room. His mind was trying to work through the problem, but thinking was getting harder. Sophie's window. She'd said it was stuck, but maybe he could break it. They were 15 stories up, though. Even if he got it open, then what? They made it back to Sophie's room, and David kicked the door shut behind them, buying them maybe a few more minutes before the smoke filled this space too. He dragged Mrs. Chen to the middle of the room and then went to the window, Sophie still clutching his belt. The window was one of those fancy floor-to-ceiling ones, probably worth more than David made in a year. He grabbed a chair and swung it at the glass. It bounced off. He swung again, harder. A crack appeared. Third time, the glass shattered outward and cool night air rushed in. David stuck his head out and gulped in breath after breath of clean air. The oxygen cleared his head a little. Below, he could see fire trucks pulling up to the building, their lights flashing red and blue. Firefighters were spilling out, moving with practiced efficiency. Help was here. But they were still 15 stories up with no way down. He looked to the side. The building next to Riverside Plaza was an older structure, slightly shorter. There was a fire escape on the adjacent wall, the old-fashioned kind made of metal. It was maybe 8 feet away from Sophie's window. 8 feet across 15 stories of empty air. Under normal circumstances, David wouldn't have even considered it. But these weren't normal circumstances. He looked back at the bedroom door. Smoke was pouring underneath it now, and he could hear the roar of the fire getting closer. "Sophie," he said, pulling her around to face him. "Do you trust me?" She looked up at him with those serious dark eyes. "Yes. Okay, I need you to get on my back. Wrap your arms around my neck and your legs around my waist and hold on as tight as you possibly can. Don't look down, don't let go. Understand?" She didn't ask why. She just nodded and climbed onto his back like she was told, her arms wrapped around his neck, and he felt her legs lock around his middle. The blanket fell away, forgotten. David turned back to Mrs. Chen. She was still unconscious, still lying in the middle of the floor. The smoke in the room was getting thick again despite the broken window. He had to make a choice, and he had to make it now. He couldn't carry them both. The fire escape wouldn't hold 3 people at once, especially if he was climbing. If he tried to take Mrs. Chen first, Sophie would be alone in this smoke-filled room. If he took Sophie first, Mrs. Chen might not have time for him to come back. His radio crackled. Through the static, he heard the security guard's voice. "Fire department is deploying ladder crews. They're coming up to 15 now. Tell them apartment 1520, David gasped into the radio. "Woman unconscious inside, hurry." He looked at Mrs. Chen one more time, memorizing her location so he could tell the firefighters exactly where to find her. Then he climbed up onto the windowsill with Sophie on his back. The night air hit his face, cool and clean. Far below, people had gathered on the street, tiny figures pointing up at the burning building. David forced himself not to look down. He focused on the fire escape, those 8 feet that suddenly seemed like 8 miles. "Remember," he told Sophie. "Don't let go." "I won't," she whispered. David gripped the window frame with both hands. He said a quick prayer, thinking of Lily, hoping that if this went wrong, his mother would take care of her. Then he jumped. For a moment, David was airborne. Time seemed to slow down, and in that stretched-out second, he was aware of everything. The heat from the burning building behind him, the cold night air rushing past, Sophie's arms locked tight around his neck. The distant sound of sirens. The gasp of the crowd below. His hands shot out and grabbed for the metal railing of the fire escape. His right hand caught it first, fingers wrapping around the cold steel bar. His left hand followed a split second later. The impact as his body swung against the fire escape knocked the wind out of him, and Sophie cried out. But her grip didn't loosen. They hung there for a moment, David's shoulders screaming in protest at supporting both their weights. His hands were slippery with sweat, and he could feel them starting to slide on the metal. With a grunt of effort, he pulled them up and over the railing, collapsing onto the metal platform of the fire escape. "Are you okay?" he gasped, and felt Sophie nod against his back. "I didn't look down," she said, her voice small and scared. "I kept my eyes closed like you said." David let himself rest for just a few seconds, pulling in deep breaths of clean air. His whole body was shaking, adrenaline coursing through his veins. They'd made it. They were out of the apartment, but they weren't safe yet. He looked through the window of the building they were now on. It was dark inside, some kind of office space, empty at this time of night. Behind them, flames were visible in Sophie's window now, orange light flickering against the night sky. "Okay, kiddo, we need to keep moving," David said, gently shifting Sophie off his back and taking her hand instead. "We're going to climb down this ladder. I'll go first and you stay right behind me, one step at a time." Sophie looked down the fire escape ladder stretching below them and her eyes went wide. "That's really high. Don't think about how high it is. Just look at my back and watch where I put my feet. Can you do that?" She swallowed hard and nodded. "I can do it." David went first, his legs feeling like jelly as he stepped onto the ladder. His hands were starting to hurt now, probably scraped up from catching the railing, but he couldn't think about that. Sophie followed him, her small hands gripping each rung with determination. They descended slowly. David kept up a steady stream of encouragement. "That's it. You're doing great. Just one more step. Look how far we've come already." Above them, they could hear the sound of breaking glass and the roar of the fire. Below, the fire truck's lights painted everything in flashes of red and blue. People on the street had spotted them now, pointing up at the man and little girl making their way down the fire escape. "Almost there," David said, though they still had several floors to go. His arms were trembling with exhaustion and his lungs still burned from the smoke. But he kept moving, one hand under one foot over and over, a rhythm that kept them going. They were on the 10th floor when David heard shouting from below. He risked a glance down and saw firefighters positioning an aerial ladder. They'd been spotted. "Help was coming! Hey up there!" A voice called through a megaphone. "Stay where you are. We're bringing a ladder up." David stopped climbing and wrapped one arm around Sophie, holding her against the fire escape platform. "Hear that? The firefighters are coming to get us." Sophie was crying now, quiet tears running down her soot-covered face. "I want my daddy." "I know, sweetie. You're going to see him real soon. I promise." The aerial ladder extended upward with a mechanical whir. A firefighter in full gear climbed up it with impressive speed. When he reached them, David had never been so happy to see another human being in his life. "I've got you folks," the firefighter said. He was young, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes visible behind his face shield. "Name's Rodriguez. You two did great getting this far. Let's get you down safe now, okay?" He helped Sophie onto the aerial ladder first, securing her with a safety harness. "Hold tight to these rails. I'm going to be right here with you the whole way." David climbed on after her, his legs nearly giving out. Now that help had arrived, his body seemed to realize how close to the edge he'd been. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the ladder. Rodriguez steadied him. "Easy there, buddy. You're safe now. Just take it slow." The descent seemed to take forever and no time at all. When David's feet finally touched solid ground, his knees buckled and he would have fallen if two firefighters hadn't caught him. They guided him to an ambulance where paramedics immediately put an oxygen mask over his face. "Just breathe," one of them said. A woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Nice. And slow. You've inhaled a lot of smoke." Sophie was in the ambulance next to him, also wearing an oxygen mask. Her face was streaked with soot and tears, but she was alive. She reached over and grabbed David's hand, holding it tight. Through the oxygen mask, David tried to speak. The paramedic pulled it away slightly. "Mrs. Chen," he rasped. The nanny, still in the apartment, office floor, unconscious. The gray-haired paramedic nodded and immediately spoke into her radio, relaying the information. "They'll get her," she assured David. "You did good telling us." David watched as firefighters rushed into the building. The smoke was thick now, pouring out of windows on the 15th floor. He could see the flames clearly, bright against the dark sky. That's where he'd been just minutes ago. That's where he'd taken Sophie from. The thought made him dizzy. "Lie back," the paramedic instructed. "You're in shock. That's normal. Just breathe and rest." But David couldn't rest. He kept watching the building, waiting to see if they'd bring Mrs. Chen out. His mind was spinning, replaying everything that had happened. The smell of smoke. Sophie huddled under the window. The jump to the fire escape. Had he really done all that? "Sophie," a voice shouted, and David turned to see a man running toward the ambulance. He was in his 40s, wearing an expensive suit that was disheveled, his tie hanging loose. His face was twisted with fear and relief. "Richard Hartwell, Daddy." Sophie pulled off her oxygen mask and reached for him. Hartwell climbed into the ambulance and grabbed his daughter, holding her so tight it looked like he'd never let go. "Oh my God, Sophie. My baby, are you okay? Are you hurt?" "I'm okay, Daddy," Sophie said, crying into his shoulder. "The janitor man saved me. He came into the fire and got me out." Hartwell looked over at David, his eyes red and filled with tears. "You saved her? You went in there and saved my daughter?" David just nodded, too tired to speak. The oxygen mask was back over his face, and he was grateful for it. His throat felt like sandpaper. More activity at the building entrance caught everyone's attention. Firefighters emerged, carrying someone on a stretcher. Mrs. Chen. She had an oxygen mask on, but David could see her chest rising and falling. Alive. "They got her," the gray-haired paramedic said, seeing where David was looking. "They got her out in time. You saved 2 lives tonight." David closed his eyes, letting the oxygen flow into his lungs. 2 lives. He thought about Lily, probably still sleeping peacefully at home with no idea what her father had just been through. He thought about his mother, who would be beside herself with worry when she found out. "Hey." David opened his eyes to find Hartwell still there, still holding Sophie, but looking directly at him. "What's your name?" David Cooper. David Cooper." Hartwell repeated it like he was memorizing it. "I don't know how to thank you. You risked your life for my daughter, for Mrs. Chen. I can never repay that." "Don't need repaying," David managed to say through the mask. "Just doing what anyone would do." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. Not anyone would have run into a burning building. Not anyone would have jumped 8 feet across empty air with a child on their back. He'd done something extraordinary tonight, though he didn't feel extraordinary. He just felt tired and grateful. So very grateful that both he and Sophie were alive to see another day. David woke up in a hospital room with sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was or why his throat hurt so badly. Then it all came rushing back, the fire, the smoke, Sophie, the jump to the fire escape. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Every muscle in his body ached like he'd been hit by a truck. His hands were wrapped in bandages and he had tubes in his nose providing oxygen. "Dad!" The voice was the sweetest sound he'd ever heard. David turned his head to see Lily sitting in a chair beside his bed, his mother right next to her. His daughter's face was streaked with dried tears, her eyes red from crying. "Hey, baby girl," David croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily jumped up and carefully hugged him, mindful of all the tubes and wires. "Mom said you were a hero. She said you saved a little girl from a fire. Is that true?" David looked at his mother over Lily's head. She had tears running down her face but was smiling. "The hospital called me at 4 in the morning, she said. Nearly gave me a heart attack. But when they told me what you did, I couldn't believe it. My son, the hero." "I'm not a hero, Ma," David said, though his chest felt warm at the words. "I just did what needed doing." "The news doesn't think so," his mother said, gesturing to the TV mounted on the wall. It was muted, but David could see footage of the burning building, then video of him and Sophie on the fire escape. The headline read, "Janitor Hero Saves Girl from Inferno." David's stomach dropped. "Oh no, please tell me that's not everywhere." "Every channel," his mother confirmed. "You're famous, David. The whole city's talking about what you did." Before David could process that information, there was a knock on the door. A nurse poked her head in, smiling. "Mr. Cooper, you have visitors. Is it okay if they come in?" Sure, David said, wondering who it could be. Richard Hartwell entered first, followed by Sophie. The little girl's face lit up when she saw David. She ran to his bedside, her father following more slowly. "You're awake," Sophie said. "Daddy said you were sleeping because you breathed too much smoke and your body needed to rest. Are you feeling better?" "Much better now," David said, meaning it. Seeing Sophie healthy and smiling made everything he'd been through worth it. Lily had retreated to stand by her grandmother, watching Sophie with curiosity. The two girls looked at each other shyly. "Sophie, this is my daughter Lily," David said. "Lily, this is Sophie. She's the brave girl I told you about." "You're really brave too," Sophie said to David. "The firefighters said nobody else would have been able to do what you did. They said you're the bravest person they've ever met." Hartwell stepped forward, and David could see the man had been crying recently. His eyes were still red, his face drawn with emotion. "Mr. Cooper, I came to thank you properly. The doctors told me you suffered smoke inhalation, burns on your hands, and you've pulled several muscles. You could have been killed, but I wasn't," David said simply, "and neither was Sophie. That's what matters. It matters to me more than you could possibly know." Hartwell's voice cracked. "Sophie is my whole world. Her mother died when she was 3, and it's just been the two of us since then. I thought I'd lost her last night. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't gone into that building..." He couldn't finish the sentence. David understood that feeling completely. He looked at Lily, his own reason for living. "I have a daughter, too. I know what she means to you." Hartwell nodded, wiping his eyes. "I want to do something for you. Money, a new job, a house, whatever you need. Name it and it's yours." David shook his head slowly. "I appreciate that, Mr. Hartwell, I really do. But I don't want your money." The businessman looked taken aback. "I don't understand. You work as a janitor. You must need financial help. Let me set you up, make sure you never have to worry about money again." "Money's not everything," David said, surprising himself with how strongly he felt about it. "I have what I need. A roof over our heads, food on the table, and my daughter. That's enough." "Dad," his mother interjected gently, "maybe you should think about this. Lily's education, your retirement. This could change your life." "Ma, if last night taught me anything, it's that life isn't about how much money you have. It's about the choices you make and the people you love." David looked at Sophie. This little girl was sitting alone in a hallway when I first saw her. She had every toy imaginable, lived in a penthouse that probably cost more than I'll make in my lifetime. But she was lonely. Money didn't fix that. Hartwell flinched like he'd been struck. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right. I've been so focused on building my business, on making more money, that I forgot what's actually important. I almost lost Sophie because of it. If I'd been home instead of at the office, you're here now," David said. "That's what matters. Be present. That's the most important thing you can give her." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Hartwell spoke again, his voice firm. "Then let me do something else. Not money, but something that would help. Your daughter, Lily. Let me set up an education fund for her. Full scholarship through college, any school she wants to attend. Please let me do this one thing." David started to refuse again, but his mother touched his shoulder. "Think about Lily, David. Think about her future." He looked at his daughter standing there in her worn jeans and hand-me-down shirt. She was smart, so smart. Just last week her teacher had said she could do anything she wanted if she applied herself. But college had always seemed like an impossible dream, something for other people's children. "Just the education fund," David said finally. "Nothing else. Deal," Hartwell said, relief evident in his voice. "And please call me Richard. Only if you call me David." Richard smiled, the first genuine smile David had seen from him. "David it is," Sophie tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, can Lily come over to play sometime? I don't have any friends." Lily looked at David hopefully. He nodded, and Lily broke into a huge grin. "I'd like that," she said to Sophie. "We could play games or watch movies or anything you want." "Really?" Sophie's whole face lit up. "You want to be my friend?" "Sure," Lily said like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You seem nice." David watched the two girls start chatting about their favorite movies and toys and felt something settle in his chest. Maybe something good could come from all this after all. Not because of money or fame, but because two lonely little girls had just found a friend in each other. Over the next few weeks, David's life changed in ways both big and small. The story of the rescue made national news. He gave one interview to the local paper and then refused all the others. Fame didn't interest him. He just wanted to get back to his normal life. The Riverside Plaza wanted to promote him to building manager, but David turned it down. He liked his job as it was. He did accept their offer of better health insurance, though, which was a relief. The building also implemented new fire safety protocols, including better smoke detection systems and more frequent fire drills. Mrs. Chen made a full recovery and, David heard, went back to her family in California. Richard Hartwell hired a new nanny, but this time he made sure to come home by 6 every evening. He even started taking Fridays off to spend time with Sophie. True to his word, Richard set up a full education fund for Lily. The paperwork arrived 2 weeks after David left the hospital, along with a note that simply said, "For your daughter's future. With gratitude, Richard." Sophie and Lily became close friends despite coming from completely different worlds. Every Saturday, Richard would bring Sophie over to David's modest apartment, or David and Lily would visit the new, smaller house Richard had bought in their neighborhood. The girls would play for hours while the fathers sat and talked, discovering they had more in common than either would have guessed. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after the fire, David and Lily were at Richard's new house for a barbecue. The girls were running around the backyard, their laughter filling the air. Richard was manning the grill and David sat nearby in a lawn chair, his hands mostly healed now. "You know what's funny?" Richard said, flipping a burger. "A year ago I would have said I had everything. Money, success, respect. But I was miserable and didn't even know it. And now?" David asked. "Now I have less money, more free time, and I'm actually happy." "Sophie's happy?" Richard looked at his daughter, who was teaching Lily how to do a cartwheel. "I almost lost all of this because I didn't see what was right in front of me. You saved more than Sophie's life that night." "David, you saved mine too." David didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and took a sip of his drink. Sophie and Lily ran over, both out of breath and grinning. "Dad, can Lily sleep over tonight?" Sophie asked. "Please? We want to build a blanket fort and watch movies." "If it's okay with David," Richard said. David looked at his daughter's hopeful face. "Sure, why not? Just this once." Both girls cheered and ran back to their game. David watched them go, his heart full. He thought about that night, about the smoke and the fear and the impossible choice he'd had to make. He thought about jumping across empty air with Sophie on his back, trusting that he'd make it to the other side. Life was like that sometimes. You had to take the leap, trust yourself, and believe that you'd land safely. You had to know what mattered most and be willing to risk everything for it. For David, what mattered most was sitting in that backyard right now, laughing and playing and living life with joy. Not the size of his bank account or the square footage of his home. Not fame or recognition or thanks, just this. Just love and friendship and 2 little girls who'd found each other, because one man decided that sometimes you have to run into the fire. "Hey, David," Richard called from the grill. "Burger's ready. Medium well, just how you like it." David stood up from his chair and walked over, accepting the plate with a smile. Through the kitchen window, he could see photos that Richard had put up. One of them showed the 4 of them at the zoo last weekend, all grinning at the camera. A family not by blood but by choice, you know. David said, "I think everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to." Richard looked at their daughters, then back at David. "Yeah," he agreed. "I think you're right." And standing there in the warm afternoon sun, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and the smell of food on the grill, David knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man in the world.